Welcome all to August 1st Planning Commission meeting. Tonight we have the Suffolk County Department of Public Works making a presentation. Our liaison with Public Works is Mr. Mark Schiffert, which is a member of our Planning Commission. And I'd like you to, Mark, come and introduce all our panel and the presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, CMAC. I'm Mark Schiffert, member of the Planning Commission. And I had the pleasure to work during that last year with the Department of Public Works, and there are two great consultants, CDM Smith and H2M. And this study originated was, we should be thank both Mark Epley and County Legislator Jay Schneiderman, who made sure that the village of Southampton was included into this study of 7 towns to provide the wastewater treatment. And in our case, the main reason, the thrust of our need in the village is both the protection of the lake of Lake Agawam, as well as the issues that we have relating to the high water table. As part of the team with whom I had the pleasure to work, I just wanted to quickly introduce the team from the Suffolk County Department of Public Works. Boris Rukovets, who is the Special Project Supervisor. We have over there Ben Wright, who is the Principal Civil Engineer. Lori Badalsari, who is the Government Liaison Officer. And we also work with Chris Lubisic, who is with the Suffolk County Health Department. And here we have representing CDM, Marianne Taylor. Marianne has a wide range of experience in water resource protection. She has managed the Suffolk County Water Resource Management and groundwater programs, as well as the New York State Health Source Water Assessment programs. And here we, it's not Nick. Nick has extensive experience with H2M in the design of oversight of many wastewater treatment and collection programs. So I'll be without any more.
Okay. Just move that and move this over here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Commissioner Sammy, for arranging to have us here tonight. We appreciate that. So my partner Nick and I tonight are going to bring you up to date. We were last here 2 years ago, and we introduced the project. We're here to kind of share the results of what we found with you. We've got about 30 slides that we're going to go through. And just a quick overview. There's some new faces, and it's been a little while, so we're going to take a few minutes in the beginning and just kind of review what the project was all about, what our objectives are, what we were seeking to accomplish, and what we did in Southampton. Most of our presentation tonight is going to be about Southampton Village and the study results. We'll talk about next steps, and then we'll have a little discussion. As we go through, if you have questions or comments, or we're off base, or you don't understand something, let's just, shout it out right away, and we'll have a dialogue going instead of a formal presentation. I know I hate it if I'm sitting someplace and people are talking on, and I lost them, 10 slides ago. It's not that useful for you, and it's not that productive for us either. So without further ado, the objective of the county's project was to evaluate the feasibility of providing sanitary sewage infrastructure in 7 currently unsewered areas that the Wastewater Task Force deemed of critical need. And as Commissioner Schiffert said, Mayor Epley had gone before the task force, and I believe that Legislator Schneiderman, and said this was an area that should be evaluated, should be considered. You're one of 7 areas that this project is looking at. The county is looking at a much greater range of study areas throughout the county. So
just to add to what Marianne is saying, there are a number of other study areas that were included by the Wastewater Treatment Task Force into the areas that have potential for to benefit from sewering, and there are a number of those that, for example, currently sewered but would benefit from expansion. One of them is the Sag Harbor, and there is another study area within the town of Southampton, Flanders Riverside, in which this team is also involved. That's to develop the sewering system for that area. Go ahead, Marianne.
So there are 6 tasks within this particular project. I know it looks like 5, but we just combined the project management and deliverables. The first is public education, and this is really part of that public education task. We've established a website that we'll visit in 1 second, and then we have stakeholder meetings that we come out and we meet, we listen to you, and then we share what we found back with you. The meat of tonight's presentation is going to be the results of the Southampton feasibility study. And the purpose of that is to identify what infrastructure would be most useful to each particular area based on the characteristics and the sewering objectives that you shared with us back a couple of years ago. What seems to fit in this area best, what will help you accomplish your goals of protecting water quality and allowing implementation of your vision plan and providing some economic benefits. Some study areas that we looked at had very focused objectives. Yours were kind of broad. They included all of the different potential benefits that were identified in the county's RFP. So the point is to provide you with enough information that you can make an informed decision as to whether or not you're interested in having sewers moving forward.
Could you speak up a little louder too?
You bet.
Please.
So just in your handout, you'll see there's a link to the project website. This has been active now for a couple of years. If you went to that link, this would be what the home page would look like. And to get to the Southampton page, you could either click right here on Southampton Village, go up to the study area, the drop-down menu there, Southampton, and you would come to a page that looks something like this. This is a little bit dated at this point. If you were to log on today, you would see a draft of the sewering feasibility study there that you can download. It's a little bit large. It's about 30 megs, so be patient as it downloads. It might take a little bit of time, but you can get any details or information that you might want right there. There's also, I should mention, a spot, if I went back, I think, where if you had any questions or comments, you could just type them right in, and they'll come to Boris and to me, and then you'll get a response. So in terms of this feasibility study development, I mentioned back at the very beginning that we had public education was our first task, and for most study areas we go out at the beginning, we come back at the end. Southampton Village, really we had a very proactive stakeholder involvement with Commissioner Schiffer. I think we probably met 7 or 8 times. He was out walking the area with Nick, laying out the collection system. I don't know how many telephone calls we had and conference calls we had. So hopefully this results in a document that responds to what the community is looking for and what the community needs. So we really are very grateful for his participation and his assistance in the whole process. So as we went through, we'll go in a little bit more detail in each of these items. The study area was refined and modified several times. We looked at alternative collection systems, alternative treatment technologies, alternative locations for a sewage treatment plant site. So we'll share all that evaluation with you, go on to the costs, and then the schedule and the next steps. And if you have questions as you go along, just, don't hesitate. This was the study area that we started with a couple of years ago. This was what was in the county's request for proposals. And over time, it was modified a little bit. One of the first potential locations that we had looked at for sewage treatment plant for treatment potential was use of the existing facility at the hospital. And Nick, do you want to share? We walked through that whole process, and that's why the study area was expanded at one point. I think we might have had. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you identify the hospital on that?
Certainly, it's over here. So this is a little difficult to see maybe. Here's the central business district here, and then the hospital was over here. And there was some talk, we had met with the mayor and a batch of stakeholders that the hospital might have some extra capacity that could be used to provide treatment for the businesses in the business district here. So that was one of the first modifications to the study area. There's probably 4 or 5 permutations along the way, so we're not going to hit all of them, but this was kind of an important one. So,
Okay, as Marion had alluded to, the study area that we were charged with looking at originally was much larger. That was on the previous slide. The study area boundaries were refined to focus on basically the highly dense business district. And initially we were looking at expanding existing facilities in hopes that it could provide some cost savings in the overall project cost. So we identified that the hospital did have a facility. As Marianne had stated, the mayor, Mark, realized that that facility may have some existing capacity, which at first glance it seemed to have that. When you looked at flow records, it looked like they were only handling about 30% of the design flow. When we looked into it further, that was only because of the occupancy of the facility. So in accordance with health services, you wouldn't be able to take up some of the existing capacity that seemed to be available without doing an expansion. When we looked into that as a first option, the expansion of the facility would require temporary side stream treatment while the upgrade would go on, and it would result in more cost than would be associated with constructing a new facility on an alternate site. Yes?
Could you just tell us who refined the area?
This was refined through collaborative meetings with Mark and the county as well as us.
So it was the mayor who helped you make this particular designation of the area?
Ultimately, yes. Through Mark, the boundaries were refined.
And how did the, and in terms, now there's discussion that the hospital will be abandoned and moved. Was any discussion about that?
There was discussion about that, but that was up in the air during this project. There was no definitive plan in terms of what was going on with that, and we had to progress the project. As such, we determined to site new facilities at alternate sites.
we had also discussed with the Department of Health Services the upgrades that would be required for the hospital, and if we expanded it in order to accommodate the flow from the village, we wouldn't have met the buffer requirements. It just wouldn't have fit with current regulations.
But if the hospital becomes a residential area,
Yeah.
it's no longer in the sewer district?
It's not a, maybe we should jump
Well,
ahead.
yeah, the boundaries.
That was a nice segue, thank you.
The boundaries, once we identified that the hospital existing facility wasn't a feasible option to expand to handle the additional flow, it was eliminated from the district boundaries. So that's no longer included in the current boundary.
Thank you.
So the current boundaries that we ultimately defined are indicated here by the red border.
And one point I would make as far as defining the boundaries was not to infringe onto residential neighborhoods as provision of sewer district, but primarily to contain it in the business district and areas that mostly contribute towards a high water table around Lake Agawam. And hence the business district, the lower grounds of the business district were the core of it.
But I had heard that perhaps the area where the hospital currently stands would be a fairly high-density residential area if the hospital was abandoned. Do you know anything about that?
I do not know anything about that in the sense that this is basically topic. As far as zoning, that area is not zoned for a high-density residential at the moment.
It's zoned for hospital.
It's zoned for hospital.
Well, if the hospital goes, then we're going to be in the throes of rezoning, no?
That would be exactly. That would be one of the discussions that would be taken. That as to what would be the reuse or the function of that area exactly.
Thank you.
So So following the definition of the boundaries through meetings with Mark, as well as the county, we identified 3 different collection systems that you know, are pretty common in this industry. You know, first and foremost, gravity sewers. They're used pretty much primarily over the other 2 options, just because they don't require much maintenance. Does someone have a question? We also looked into vacuum sewer systems and low pressure sewer systems. Both of these systems are constructed with smaller diameter piping. They don't typically require the depth of installation that gravity sewers would require, and in this area with the high groundwater table, they seem like more feasible options. Ultimately, we determined that low pressure sewers were the way to go. For anyone that doesn't know, low pressure sewers require on-site grinder stations on each property served, which grinds up the waste flow, pumps it into a pressure main, and in turn conveys it to the treatment facility. This particular system, because of the area here, doesn't require a centralized municipal pump station. These low pressure sewers would be able to pump directly to the treatment plant. That is a reason why we eliminated vacuum sewers as a potential candidate for the selected collection system. The vacuum sewers would require additional area because you'd have to site a centralized pump station, which in turn would create the vacuum on the sewer system that would draw water off everyone's property. Another reason for the low pressure sewers was you don't have to be concerned with the pitch of the pipe because it is a forced system. You can directionally drill. You don't have to deal with these open cuts all over the place that tend to get messy. There is some instances where you would need it in this area, but we selected this for the potential to minimize the disturbances to traffic and parking.
It's an active commercial area, so if we ripped open road to road and cut down, you know, businesses, we're really trying to seek the least impact on this developed area. If it was a brand new area, a brand new development, gravity sewers might have risen up in the ranking a little bit, but for an area that's already developed and used every day, we're trying to keep construction impacts to the minimum possible.
And these are some additional pictures just showing typical installations. Here, in this instance, in this location where they were doing the work, they weren't able to open directional drill, they had to open cut, but you can see the relative depth is not there, not too deep. It's relatively shallow. You can get this done quicker typically than you can when you're installing gravity sewers. The service laterals that extend to each property are between 1.5 inches and 2 inches in diameter. They're a lot smaller, a lot easier to install, and each property has its own shut-off valves. In the case of emergency, they can shut them off and they can service that property or address the issues that may be happening at the pump station.
Yeah, can you give us some indication as to why, for instance, there are 3 pipes laid down over there?
Yeah, in this particular installation, the 3 pipes were there. This is actually in the village of Patchogue. They have a pretty extensive low pressure sewer network, and the function of the system is based on overall pressure that the pumps can overcome. So as you're expanding these systems, like in Patchogue, it's under constant expansion, and they're trying to sewer other areas down by the water for environmental reasons. They install these additional mains so they have that extra pressure capacity within the system. In instances like this project, it was told that we're just supposed to focus on the existing district. We do have areas, and you'll see later on, where you'll see where we're proposing parallel lines where needed, but they're not for future expansion. It's for what's already existing in the village. After we, yes?
Yeah, can I ask you, what is the material piping made of, and how is the piping connections done?
It's high-density polyethylene piping, and they're butt fused. or electrofused.
Yeah.
So they also, after installation, they are pressure tested to ensure the system is tight and it won't leak.
Just to let the audience know, I've gone to schools on handling gas pipe. When you butt fuse that stuff together and you do a tensile strength that, you break the pipe before you break the fitting. That's how strong that fusing piece is.
And that's also why directionally drilling is a good application for it, because you are pulling that pipe through the hole that you drill. After we identified the collection system technology, we looked at different treatment processes. First treatment process is activated sludge. The second is sequencing batch reactor process. Third is membrane biological reactors.
Can I just interrupt for 1
yes.
second?
Yeah, sure.
So normally, you know, if it's a groundwater discharge, a wastewater treatment plant discharging to groundwater, the effluent limit, the permit limit is 10 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. In this area, because of the sensitivity with the down gradient Lake Agawam, we wanted to get really the best available technology, the highest level of treatment to reduce that nitrogen level as much as possible. So we just kind of wanted that as a backdrop as you,
Okay.
that was kind of driving our,
Could I just ask, Lake Agawam is a brackish pond, no? What is this, are you,
it is groundwater fed.
yeah, okay, but it is?
It still could be brackish, but it does have a groundwater,
It basically hosts snapping turtles and canoes, as far as I know. What is this does the, what I consider obsession with the clarity of the water in Lake Agawam, what is that about? Can you explain that further?
I probably know the least about Lake Agawam of most people in the room. I know what I get from looking at the Lake Agawam website and reading the management plan and what the Stony Brook professor has said. We've done some groundwater models that show that it is groundwater from this area does discharge into Lake Agawam, but it's my understanding that it does have a connection, right? Yes,
Yeah, I
thank you.
mean, Lake Agawam has been very heavily studied over the last few years. As you know, there's a separate organization that's been funding studies.
Yes.
It, like all ponds in the village, it's fed from a groundwater system that goes north to south, which anybody who knows any of the other ponds, they're all the same. They're all fed north to south, and then they end up in these ponds that are very near the ocean.
Right.
Right.
You know, you can go through the village. This pond is in very, very bad shape. Has been from a long time. It's been improved a lot in the last 10 years from the things the village has done and some of the things that people who live around the lake have done to reduce the discharge into the lake. But clearly the lake is nowhere near a healthy lake or pond or whatever you want to call it at this point. And it's been a goal of the Planning Commission of the village for a long time to improve the lake. And we know that most of the material coming into the lake is coming from the north. No, not from all around, from the north.
Really?
So the village has a north-south
Okay,
orientation.
so what,
Right.
so.
So if you go to the
out
blocks
here-
to the north of the lake, which is here, where we sit, this is where water and sewage and everything else is going into the lake.
But-
Yeah.
So it's not an east-west, it's a north-south.
Right, okay, just since I've been here, it's always been the way it was.
It's actually, if you
It's
look at the
improved.
studies, it got worse for a very long time, and in the last few years, from the work the village and the private homeowners have done around the lake, it's begun to improve, but there's an enormous amount still to be done.
This just kind of is just a figure, an extra figure that we had. We have a groundwater model, and I don't know, can you see the little flow arrows on it going from north to south? This is the direction of groundwater flow. This blue area is the village area, the central district right here that we're talking about sewering. Down here, you can see the groundwater flow kind of goes from north to south and then in, down here. It's exactly as you described.
Right.
And there's stormwater going in too, which is not depicted
Right.
here. We're just really looking at the groundwater component. But it is exactly as you said, from north to south. I haven't been there all this summer to tell you what the quality is like this year, but, you know.
It's better than some other years, but not great. Don't go swimming.
Go back to there. I don't know if we answered your question.
Did you, I
Well,
don't
the-
know that much. Did you test groundwater? Is that the only place where you test groundwater? I don't know. It
No,
just-
the county tests groundwater throughout the county,
Well, in the village, I'm saying.
in the village.
Was any other groundwater tested?
Besides the
I'm-
lake water,
Uh-huh.
you mean the other ponds in the area?
I don't know. I don't know how this works, but it
What's
just,
the purpose?
Well,
is that the only place where groundwater
For
goes?
seasons, then you
No,
No.
the groundwater from the village business district goes
Goes,
primarily to
okay,
this.
that makes sense.
That's right.
So,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. As Marion had said before, the driving force behind selecting one of the treatment technologies was the environmental issues with Lake Agawam and improving groundwater quality in the area. By sewering the area, you're removing nitrogen point sources from groundwater, which in turn will reduce the nitrogen concentrations going into the lake. In terms of treatment technology, the activated sludge process can achieve 10 milligram per liter effluent nitrogen consistently. SBR processes can achieve between 5 to 8, and MBRs are considered the current limited technology, and they can achieve 3 milligram per liter effluent nitrogen. Alternative on-site sewage disposal systems, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with those. There was a study done by Suffolk County Department of Health Services. Currently, they have approved a few select systems for treatment up to 15,000 gallons a day. If we applied that to this study area, as you'll see later, based on the flow projections, it would require numerous on-site systems, which the space isn't available in the village. So it was deemed not to further investigate any more than that. The selected process, as I said, was the membrane technology, just because it is the limit. It'll give you the best benefit in terms of nitrogen removal. The low-pressure sewer collection system would pump into a buffer tank or an equalization tank, which in turn would buffer any flow surges into the process, so you can optimize equipment sizing downstream. It would feed a constant flow through a screen, and it would enter your process tanks for treatment, and then effluent, and get pumped to subsurface leaching pools.
Is the study also
Yes.
considering locations for these subsurface leaching pools?
Yeah, you'll see that on a later
Got two
slide.
slides,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Could you go back to that slide? I'm curious to see how that septic plant works. I'm familiar with the old-fashioned aeration process.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain to me a little bit more how that,
You
I
do,
understand
you do.
you go through the filtering process, and then I remember that in the textbooks, there was the aeration process, and then you chlorinate the water that's discharged.
Well, you still nitrify the water, denitrify the water. You pump it into a tank, and in this tank, the water that's in there is getting pulled through a filter. So it's getting sucked through a filter, which in turn is called permeate, and that's your clean effluent. And the concentration of the water in this filter, some of it gets wasted to a waste tank, which is sludge, and some of it gets recirculated to keep the constant feed going through the system to maintain your biological process.
So does the filter, it has to be replaced every so often in that?
No, this doesn't get replaced. It has a constant air scour, so it makes sure that any particles or mass that kind of could build up on it doesn't. And if operated properly, they shouldn't get replaced.
So basically, there's no sludge to get rid of when you have a plant like this?
No, there is sludge, because you can't maintain, you still have to waste the sludge that builds up in here, whatever is left from the clean water that's getting pulled out.
And then to get rid of this sludge, what arrangements does the county have for us, the village, to get rid of this?
Well,
Where
again,
would it be taken?
it would get taken to Bergen Point, and that would be part of the agreement or whatever is done. Right now, this is just the feasibility for the selective process. Yes.
When there are like heavy rains, like hurricanes, were any of these processes more favorable for these huge deluges that we seem to be experiencing?
Well, this is just for sanitary flow, so it's not a combined system. It's not going to get inundated by floodwaters. Each low pressure system on everyone's property, you have a pump station. You're going to gravity flow into an enclosed pump station. That pump station is just going to pump your sanitary flow.
Oh, okay.
All runoff, everything else is still going to be conveyed through a separate stormwater system and leaching pools.
And do we have that?
No, the way we addressed that in the master plan was to, for instance, on Windmill Lane, the
Yeah,
building
that-
on this side to reduce, and also as you see the projects that were undertaken recently to increase the wells along the path of the stormwater. But the stormwater is independent of this system.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Are there any individual on-site systems now that get the same quality or close to the quality that the MVR systems get?
There aren't any that are approved for that limit. No, they're only
Well,
approved
the
at,
Nitrix reaches it, but it's,
yeah.
as far as a single on-site for residential, it's, at this point, price prohibitive.
Mm-hmm.
How many gallons a day are you talking about for this proposed district?
For the proposed district, it's around 145,000 gallons a day.
And just to give us an idea of scale, the hospitals,
His design flow
yes.
was
130?
130,000 gallons a day. So, as I had mentioned earlier, you know, one of the collaborative meetings I had, I took a ride out here, I met with Mark, and we sat down and looked at an overview of the area and discussed what type of routing would be optimal. So, through meeting with him, we tried to keep as much as the sewer off the main road over here. We tried to route as much of it in the backs of the properties where existing septic systems and leaching pools are, to minimize impacts to property owners with plumbing reconfigurations and things of the sort when it comes time to connect to the sewer system. It's hard to see on this scale, but this is the main trunk line. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit out of the alternate sites selected. We deemed this area over here adjacent to the village police precinct to be the site for the treatment plant. So where we mentioned multiple lines in parallel, this is the location where those lines would be found. And everything would pump to this trunk line, and it would outfall the treatment plant. As I just mentioned, the 3 alternative sites that were identified were up here, adjacent, I believe the post office property was up in this area, the police precinct, and in the parking lot behind the theater. Each area was evaluated based on the selected treatment process technology and Suffolk County buffer requirements. Out of all 3 sites that were looked at, the one on the police precinct was the only one to meet the buffer space requirements and have adequate land for recharge. And here's a zoomed in view to give you an idea of the proposed configuration. So typically you would have a treatment process, you would need to provide space for 100% expansion, and within that 100% expansion maintain your buffer distance of 200 feet. So this is showing that the buffer is maintained to habitable structures surrounding it. The subsurface leaching would be configured on site over here. And again, with the leaching, the 2 different colors represent 100% of the flow and another 100% of the flow. So you can cycle between the 2.
Nick, what's the reason for the 100%
Expansion.
expansion?
It's a requirement that Suffolk County Department of Health requires.
There's usually
redundancy.
redundancy, you know, in case most municipalities have a redundancy requirement. So if some treatment train goes down or that your leaching field gets clogged up, you've got something in place to handle what's going on. I mean, one of the other reasons why Nick recommended the MBRs is because they have the smallest footprint of the other technologies that we spoke about, because this is a tight area. It's not like you have acres and acres that we can devote to treatment. And
So this is not an implementation plan, this is just a spatial projection.
this,
Spatial projection of what the plant would occupy.
yeah.
Yes.
There's two questions I have. Is that each commercial building would have to have two backup pumps? One primary, one secondary, in case one should fail for pumping?
I know right now in other areas, I keep alluding to the village of Patchogue, they have a pretty extensive low pressure system in place, and they're required to have one redundant online pump. So if you only required to have one pump, your pump station would have two in place. In the event that one fails, the other would cycle on.
And then if we lose electricity in the village, that means these buildings would be shut down, they couldn't use any sewage.
Well, all the panels that operate these pump stations would have a standby generator hookup
Yeah,
connection.
but I'm talking
and-
about the individual premises
Well-
that has to have a pump and to pump into your low pressure system.
Exactly, but the panel that controls that system, that does get fed by the power of the building, will have a transfer switch with a generator hookup. So whoever's charged with operating the district, whether it be a county-owned district or if the village owns it and they contract out operations, those operators would be responsible for making sure that these stations do pump out in buildings that are occupied. If it's a severe power outage, I don't know if many of these businesses would be open.
I'm just
I'm not
thinking
sure.
about, we had Hurricane Sandy, we lost the village, power in the village for a couple of days.
Yeah, yeah. So, I understand that. Again, if they're using flow, the operators are gonna have to be going around seeing who's open and who's not. It's all part of the emergency response that would have to be implemented. Yes?
I heard from some friends who were up in the Valley Stream area that some areas actually had the sewage coming back into houses when the area got inundated with water. And I know that's probably about as high an elevation as you can find in the sort of business district where this is being cited, but what kind of system, do you have any idea what kind of system they would have had that would have allowed that to happen?
Probably. It was gravity sewers.
It was Bay Park, it was right on the water. It
Yes.
discharges
Yeah.
right to the coast, so it's a little bit different situation. There's not a tidal situation here.
And
So
these,
something like that, if we, it's quite conceivable that almost a valley that is Windmill Lane is if we had large surge coming into Lake Agawam that would flow a lot of water right down to where's Bowdoin Square, and I don't know whether you get water that would come up as high as the police station, but how would this type of a system react in that set of
well, the
circumstances?
treatment facility would be designed to be constructed above the floodplain regardless. As far as the low pressure pump stations, they typically don't get inundated like that. They won't, the system you're talking about, the gravity sewers, manholes were filling up, streets were flooded with standing water. These systems typically you wouldn't get that. And as far as backflow into your home, that wouldn't happen either. On these pump stations, there are check valves in place that if any flow surges back, those valves slam shut, and you're not going to get that.
But we do have, we have power outages more often than not. We haven't had them this year, but certainly in the hurricane, people were without power for 10 days. The actual main here was active. I used the internet here. This part did have power. But is there any, I know you said about a generator, but we don't have a very consistent power situation when there are nor'easters and hurricanes, I would say. History bears that out, and sometimes just who knows why.
Well, the majority of properties within these boundaries are all commercial. Now, I'm assuming if a storm is that severe, is everything open? Is everything functioning? Is everyone
The
using
village
water?
was pretty open after the hurricane, even though we had no power or communications whatsoever.
But you're talking at your residence,
Right.
your
Less
residence
than-
isn't
Less than a
included.
mile away.
but
Yes.
it's not included in the sewer district. It's not included in the area that we're looking at serving.
Right,
But
I'm
Nick,
only,
let me rephrase what is being asked, is that
I depended
assuming
on it.
that, assuming that even in the village business district,
Yes.
we have blackout
Yeah.
for a long period of time. And certain businesses may be operating, certain other businesses are shut off. You did mention about some authority that basically signs off on bringing buildings back into circulation or operation
Well-
after emergency of
well,
that nature.
What I alluded to was, as of now, this is a feasibility study. We identified 2 feasible options for the municipality that would operate this system. This system could either be a county district, which the county would operate with their own on-staff operators, or it would be a village district. Now, you guys don't have sanitary employees that would do this. What you would end up doing most likely is contract out operators to come into the town or village and control or operate the treatment plant, operate the collection system. Now, in the event of a power outage at the treatment plant, alarms would go off because you're going to go on generator power. That's what this is right here. This is emergency backup generator to maintain your process operations. When that happens, those alarms typically get called out. They'll call out the operators. The operators know the alarm. They're required by contract to come in and investigate and see who's impacted and what's going on. When they're doing that, part of their responsibilities would be to go around with a generator, look at businesses that are in operation, knock on doors, see what's going on, see who's using flow, see if there's an issue with the pump station, and identify these things and try and ensure that people do stay in service that need to stay in service during periods of power outage.
Are there precedents for these systems in Suffolk and any other municipalities?
Other
Precedent.
Village of Patchogue operates their own, yeah.
And that's again a private entity that runs their operation?
No, the Village of Patchogue has its own sewer district staff and collection system personnel.
But I think our concern is that, at least with Sandy, we didn't, all of Long Island needed help. Maybe us not as much as other people. So how is this going to play out? And I assume that there's probably going to be other events like this where we might not be the first people on the list to be having the people come out and help us, depending on how much work they have. All of Long Island, right, was affected.
I understand that, but typically when you write your contract, you're contracting someone that's required to do it. If they don't do it for that reason, I don't have the answer for
Lipa was supposed to deliver
that.
electricity. What can I say? It didn't happen.
And that's also considering that it would go to a private entity.
Exactly.
Again, there's the options of either the county or the village itself taking on that
Yeah,
responsibility.
exactly. So I'm stating a certain scenario based on a potential option.
But are there studies of whether response time to emergencies for private as opposed to hired municipality workers that we would have?
Yeah.
Can we just, this is a feasibility study, not an
I know, but these
implementation.
are real
I
concerns.
understand that, and these are good concerns. I'm just saying,
Because we don't live just anywhere.
I agree with you, but we're
Okay.
really asking implementation issues, which I don't think we've yet asked them to study.
All right,
We
well,
asked them to study the
Fine,
feasibility first.
Fine.
Yeah, we were just looking at the feasibility of sewering the area, what type of technology would be best to do that, as well as providing treatment and identifying costs associated with
I
that.
can tell you, go ahead, Mark.
Maybe just one question answered will help us all understand the scope of what's being projected.
Mhm.
Now, we're running pipes from all of the buildings in the sewer district to collect the waste. At the same time, at each building, there's going to be a pump or pumps.
Yes.
Is the power to that pump coming from that landowner, or is it coming from the sewer district?
It's coming from each individual property
But
owner.
it could come from the sewer district, which would kind of answer the whole question. I
If you,
suppose.
I don't see how that would be feasible to even do.
Why?
To run power feed,
Yes.
power
Next to all the
lines.
pipes,
Mhm.
to each of the.
I mean, once
I've
That's a really interesting
That's
thought.
an interesting thought, I haven't seen that
That's
thought.
a really interesting thought.
That'll
Yeah,
make it
but
easier.
the electrical, the cost associated with that would way outweigh the electrical consumption cost of these pumps. They don't consume that much electricity, on the order of $150 a year,
Sure.
averaged out over 12 months is what the increase in electrical consumption would be.
But you're talking about the fail-safe.
That's what I was talking about, the
Yeah,
That's a
fail-safe.
really
with the
interesting
generator.
Well,
thought.
that's all, because
Mhm.
not every business or home has a
A
generator.
generator, right?
Yeah,
And
So,
also, again, we're talking about a very small area. It need not even this emergency power line need not be buried. It could be, I mean, we have all of our lines right now above ground, pretty much in the village.
That's an
There
interesting
Yeah,
could
that
be
is
just one
interesting.
core line coming from this to the center parking and feeding pretty much all the village in that sense. if
it's
you-
just a thought.
Yeah, that's-
no, that
that's
is
interesting.
interesting thought.
Pumps could be individually wired with a backup. You know, for some small generator, they only work at 110 volts, you know?
Yeah.
It could be isolated.
Mhm.
So if there was a catastrophe, so you switch to a Honda generator. Big deal.
Yeah. They do work off that.
I mean, if you're a restaurant operating in the district and there's a power failure, if you're operating, then you must have a backup generator, right? If you're cooking, no?
We had power in the main village for some reason.
Okay.
And
But-
that was in the library, those were the places you could charge your
Okay.
cell phone, watch the news, find out something. And for me, at least during the hurricane and the aftermath, it was important. And so now, that's why I was asking. I'm asking no more questions.
No, that's okay. No, that's all right. I think somebody else had
I
to.
just wondered, that means every business owner, every property, I should say property owner in the commercial areas could be sued, should be notified that when this does, or if this does happen, that they're gonna have to provide either an external connection to that pump or a backup power supply.
That's all part of the required and approved pump station configuration.
Right, the other question I have is, what is the configuration of this pump? Is it gonna be a cement tank with the pump in it, being a certain size, be buried in a?
Typically, they're made out of a polyethylene material, and there's a ballast integrated into it when you're in high groundwater situations. For businesses, they range in size just based upon the flow generated by the business, but typically they're maybe a little wider than a 55-gallon drum stacked up on top of each other.
That's just strictly like for a clothing store, but if it was for a restaurant or a deli or something,
They could be substantially larger, yes.
okay. But the health department would give us the specifications for each property owner, what he'd have to put in.
Yeah. They would be based on the application and the approved.
And just approximately, what would be a cost for well,
We're gonna get to all that.
Okay.
We're gonna get to
We're
that.
about 4 slides away, maybe.
So in case you were all wondering in terms of what would a potential building look like that would house this, this is one located in Suffolk County Sewer District number 2.
This one's a lot bigger. This one's about
Yeah.
400,000 gallons per day. So it's almost 3 times the size of what
Which one is this?
Miller Place. So it's up on the North Shore. It's a nice community. I'm gonna say the homes in that area are between $500,000 and $1 million.
Which building?
Right there. What's
That's a
that?
tree.
I was there yesterday, they said it was 230,000 gallons a day.
230,000?
Maybe that's what they're seeing.
That's what they told me.
I thought it was
That's what they're.
400,000.
Yeah, it
Okay.
may not be the full flow, but the design is for 400,000.
You were there yesterday, really? It wasn't bad, right?
No, it's well run.
Yeah. This is it from another angle. I mean, people sometimes think it's the golf club, you know, when they pull into that development, it's adjacent to the golf
carts,
course.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly, that would be a giveaway. Boris has hosted little tours for other community groups who are concerned about having a facility like this within their midst. But
So if you're interested, we'll be happy to arrange for it.
So proportionally, you're saying that the building requirements for us would be a third of this size?
this is not an MBR, so I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Exactly the
not sure.
ratio, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio like that.
I don't know, but did you go on a tour there, or you just happened to?
It's a long story.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I did go on a tour.
Okay. But it's kind of, it's not obtrusive or really, it doesn't, you know, people don't know it's there really.
No, actually, I looked at the charts, and they were operating between 3 and 4 parts per liter in nitrogen.
Oh, okay, good,
Of late, so it's impressive.
yeah.
Do you know what the approximate footprint of that building is? Is it 100 by 100 or?
Our
The whole site's 5 acres, I don't know the size of the building, but,
Yeah,
It's bigger than that.
yeah.
I think it's
I
probably
think it is
150.
yeah, it's pretty large.
Okay, so, like I said earlier, we evaluated the cost based on whether this would be a county district, a village district, and I'll get into the differences in them on the following slides. But the costs over here, these aren't just construction costs. These include survey, they include soil borings, they include preparation of design documents, the approval process with the county agencies. So these numbers aren't representative of what's it going to take to build, but it is representative of what it's going to take to complete the project. To minimize the upfront costs anticipated to be paid by property owners looking to connect, we included a fund into the total bond amount to purchase each individual grinder station. So if the project moves forward, part of the money bonded for the project would go towards buying out these pump stations, and as people are ready to connect, those pump stations would be turned over to them upon application to connect. Additionally, the existing septic systems would have to be abandoned, so to minimize people having to pay that one-time cost all at once, it'll get distributed over the total bond period, and that's where this septic system abandonment fund came into place, and as well as a sewer district startup fund. We need to write a sewer ordinance, certain materials, new hires to the village, administrators, all that goes into this number right here. So in the end, the total construction and engineering costs are around $28.8 million for this project.
That's escalated to the anticipated midpoint construction of 2017, except for the septic system abandonment fund, which I think is escalated to at the actual time of connection around 2018. So these are escalated into the future as well.
And so basically to give an idea, there aren't many of these in the area. There are mainly these types of uses in the area. We gave flow ranges for those properties, and these flow ranges are relative to the actual low pressure sewer pump station that would be required for those sites. This sewer district assessment right here is based off of the flow. It's the operation and maintenance charge for a county district. The county has a rate currently of $1.71 a gallon, so that's where these numbers were generated from. Each individual pump station now, in addition to having your own O&M staff, make sure that they're powered during power outages and make sure that people are flowing. They are on private property, so each private property owner is required to have a service contract with the manufacturer. In case these pumps are severely damaged and need to get replaced, these service contracts cover all that. And as I was saying earlier, I know the electrical consumption question came up. It was more from an emergency standpoint, but these are typical costs associated with pump stations that can convey these flows. So in the end, the total O&M cost for all types of properties are right here in this end column. Yes?
Well, just to get a clearer idea in my head, it's probably self-evident from what you've said, but you guys are basically a turnkey operation, and you bring in the bonding company, and the bonding company makes sure that all of the pieces are in place, or how do you work?
No, we're just determining a plan, a preliminary plan, and cost associated with that preliminary plan. As far as creating a district goes, that's one of the next steps that you'll see. We have a project schedule in the end. We're just engineering consultants retained by the county to look at what is necessary to sewer and provide wastewater treatment in each of those 7 areas that were identified in the beginning of the presentation.
So as consultants, do you recommend the actual entity that's going to do the groundwork? And do you recommend the bonding company, or how do you work?
If retained by the client to do the design, we can recommend contractors that would construct that. And as far as that goes, the contractors are responsible of obtaining.
And how often have you successfully packaged such projects?
Well, let's take a step back. If this were to be established as a county district, the county would go out for the bonds. It would have nothing to do with us. The county would probably go for the low interest rate, the EFC bonds, kind of at 2%. So that's completely independent of, you know, anybody's, well, Ben might be involved in terms
The
of.
county has 24 sewer districts, and if the decision after this feasibility study is to go forward, and it's either going to be a village district or a county district. If it's a county district, then the village would probably petition the local our legislator in order to appropriate money to get into the next phase of designing it and going forward. But each district pays for whatever they get. So we would be the representative going, and we have bond counsel that approves certain things, anything that we appropriate in bond. But there are different alternatives that are listed in the report, and I believe also in the presentation, where Environmental Facilities Corporation has 2% low-interest loans for 30 years. The county typically does 20 years at 4%. We have the ability to go to 30 years also at 4%, but the 2% at 30 is really the most economical one. We did submit an application to the Environmental Facilities Corporation for this project, just in case we're going to go forward with it. I'm not sure if that answers it, but really...
You're not going it alone, if that's what your question was.
And
you don't have to figure this all out on your own.
I'm curious as to who here has the talent to put the whole package together for the village?
Well,
we've done it a number of times. Just one other thing we have to do.
In the village?
Not for this village, no. No, for other, we have 24 sewer, so we've done this process before. But other than bond counsel, we have to go through, after a public hearing process, the state controller's office in order for them to say, yes, the people that are in the service area can afford it. And that's the last step before the district is created.
What's the role of the health department in this equation? I mean, I know they've approved certain systems, but when it comes to the creation of a sewer district, what kind of jurisdiction do they have as far as monitoring or signing off or approving?
You know what, I think we'll let Chris take
Yeah,
that.
they really function as an oversight regulatory agency. You know, we don't get involved in the construction of it. We oversee the construction of it. We have regulations that have to be complied with. The health department, like I said, is in this area is a more regulatory oversight organization. We make sure it's done correctly.
Again, going back to Reiner's question, as far as village like ours that's never been sewered, this is at the fringe of doing these studies, feasibility studies. Besides going out to private consultants for some sort of taking leadership in bringing all these elements together, public county will not take that role, is that correct?
No, they might, right? It's a
If
decision.
it's petitioned to the county and the county legislature appropriates funding, then we'll go through, start the process of having it designed and get all the steps necessary to create the district.
Even if that's a village district and not a county district?
No, if it's a village district, then we're basically completed after feasibility study.
You have two scenarios basically, the county or the village. So the county was the one that was described.
Which is an issue we haven't even got into yet, whether and how much control the village ultimately wants over the sewer district and how it runs.
Correct.
Exactly.
Right, that's
Yeah,
really
that's part of the decision making.
So if you're not as concerned about what's going to happen, you might say the county can do it and it's financially better, but you lose some control inevitably when you have an outside party doing it.
But it
Exactly.
also, yeah, but the other factor is obviously who's going to be operating that, whether you need the outside private entity to run the plant, or you would like the county to do that. That's your decision.
And how does it work out in terms of businesses joining up with the system? Are they required? Is it optional? And then how does the cost component for those businesses operate?
You know what, maybe we'll just proceed a little bit more.
Okay.
And then we'll start to answer your question, and then if we don't answer it completely, then just shout again. So we have an operational cost for a village district, which are slightly higher, as you might have imagined, than the county district.
Yeah, and the reason being is we assume contract operations. We don't know if the village is gonna want to try and operate on their own with their own staff, hire people. We don't know what that expense is, but we are familiar with other areas that are under contract operations, and those operations rates are about $2.32 a gallon when compared to Suffolk County's $1.71. And that's why you notice that the sewer district assessment here for a village district is higher than what it would be if it was a county.
If you opted to go it completely alone, it would probably be a little bit higher. You'd have to staff up, get all the equipment, you know, on top of the facilities. You have to establish your own billing system. You know, there's a lot involved just to setting up this whole new organization. So contract ops seem to be kind of like a compromise.
And as stated earlier, how Ben mentioned, there are different financing options to pay for the bond that is going to be needed to do this project. And the way you base or assess it is based on the typical assessed value within the district. The typical assessed value of property within the district based on the assessed value, not fair market, is $28,000, give or take. And the annual debt service is a function of that bond. So Ben had indicated EFC was the most economical, so that's what we based our annual debt service numbers on. And that's distributing this cost over 30 years at a 2% compounded interest rate. So the annual charge to someone in the district to pay for that bond is approximately $8,700 a year. The annual electricity cost and service contract for a typical commercial property is $1,850, and the annual O&M, if it was a county, as stated earlier, is based on that $1.71 a gallon, and for a village would be under contract ops at $232, which brings the total annual amount for a typical commercial property to $15,700 or $17,500, whether it's a county or a district, county or a village district, sorry.
That's kind of based off flow. So this is a relatively high flow. This is probably over 3,000 gallons per day, just over 3,000 gallons per day. So a small office would be more on the order of what we were showing for a residence before. So you would have the debt service, electricity cost more on the order of $100 a year, and an O&M under 1,000. It would bring that down under like 10,000 for a smaller, smaller establishment.
Low water use business.
Yeah, I mean, when Mark went through all the water records with us, there's a couple of big drivers, there's a couple of laundromats. They're going to be higher.
They're gonna have the majority of the burden of the debt service when it is.
Yeah. There's a big range in what you could expect. This is just based on the 3,000 gallons per day, but most of your businesses are not up that high. Some are higher.
So, as stated earlier, benefits associated with moving forward with this project are reduction in nitrogen loading to the environment.
I'm just going to jump in like
Sure.
1 second. When we did an assessment to try to quantify what that benefit might be. What's
You want to show the two figures?
I'll show one anyway. So what we did is for each one of the parcels here, based on land use type, the Department of Health Services has typical nitrogen loading rates or concentrations associated with each. So we put them into the groundwater model based on the land use type, kind of ran it forward to see what the nitrogen load to the groundwater from this area would be. before sewering, and then after sewering, we just put the total load in here, 3 milligrams per liter times the flow into the load. And it reduced nitrogen to this area by about 20 pounds a year. 20 pounds a year? 20 pounds a day. If I get that right. It was, it was something. It only improves the water quality as you get down towards Lake Agawam, the nitrogen concentration in the groundwater by about a part, by about 1 milligram per liter. So it's a small but perceptible difference. I mean, it could be all the difference in the world. But yeah, so we tried to quantify that. That's one of the benefits. All right. The second is that it supports implementation of the vision plan. A lot of the second floor residential areas that were identified in the vision plan really couldn't be implemented without sewers, so it allows you to do that. The construction impacts, the multiplier effect that we have is based on a series of studies. These benefits, just to be clear, don't accrue to the village, all of them, this multiplier effect. There have been several studies done. Clean Water Agency has done them, the University of Nebraska, an agency out in Ohio, to see what's the effect on economic activity of each dollar spent on sewers, and it's between $1.50 and $3.50. So for a $28 million capital project, you'd come up with a boost to the economy of about $100 million, up to about that, but not necessarily right here to the property owners who are paying for the sewers. Similarly, studies have shown, based on, for every $1,000 spent on sewers, how many job hours that projects, and it comes up to about 225 job years. Probably the best estimate of what could occur would be in Nelson Pope's EAF, their economic impact of the implementation of the vision plan, which would be allowed to move forward if sewering occurred. So that's just kind of a quick overview of the benefits that you might have. And so, yes?
Has there been any consideration to upgrade the individual users' equipment, like their toilets, and switch over to low GPM toilets and 0 GPM urinals and things like that?
Not as part of this study, and that's good at reducing flow. It doesn't do anything for the
I understand. I'm just saying, if you reduce, if you can stop the flow, then you have less of a load to cure.
You still have the same poundage, but do you mean less of a flow to the plant?
Hydraulically, you're talking about when the water table rises, you're not putting that much volume into them.
I mean, I've seen these urinals that apparently don't use anything. I don't know how they work, but chemicals, I have no idea. I saw them out in Michigan. But I know there's low GPM toilets. That's what they've been around for a long time.
Yeah, you're talking about water conservation, essentially, wastewater conservation.
At the end of the day,
in that sense,
if you're using less to flush the toilets, less going into the system, then less to process.
Yeah, you could reduce it to a certain amount, but there will still be a flow.
I understand, but
that needs to
the
be
idea
taken
is
care of. It's a good practice.
Reduce the whole thing to begin with, then you have less to process.
Well, it increases strength.
If
you have less water, you have same waste, it increases strength.
Concentration goes
And
up.
in terms of treatment, I'm not talking
Yeah,
about
okay,
reducing hydraulics, but in terms of treatment, it does.
I was just wondering if there was a consideration.
It was considered kind of peripherally in the sense that the influence strength that was included here considered that people will be moving more and more to the conservation fixtures.
Yes.
So the strength that we have in here is much higher than a strength we would have projected, say, 10 years ago.
Gotcha.
So moving forward, it's kind of considered, but that's kind of peripheral. It doesn't really address what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's one of the tools in the toolbox of managing wastewater, but it doesn't solve, the problem, the issue entirely. So it could be factored in.
The thinking is that there's not one answer for everything. That basically has to be approached from many different venues.
Correct, but right, and you still have to decide the key issue, how to handle the wastewater, whether you reduce it a little bit while increasing the concentration. The wastewater is still there.
You have a hot water heater on one side of the building, and you turn on the water, and it takes around a half an hour to get the water. And at the other side of the building, there's a lot of water being wasted.
Before you get hot.
Yeah, before you get the hot water on your side of the house. And it's just, There's conservation measures that could be
Yeah, and there are
introduced.
studies out there, and there are successes, you know, with water conservation. But again, I mean, the main issue
Yeah.
remains. We have to address it.
There's a question that didn't get answered before, and that was...
He's got his hand up
I'm sorry.
again, that's
I'm
okay,
sorry.
no.
No, go ahead.
Yeah,
Well, I was just wondering, you know, the numbers you quote are average annual costs, and that's assuming that everybody joins the system? And
No.
is there a requirement when these systems are set up, like in Patchogue, if someone has a good septic system or a field in their parking lot, are they required then to hook up into the system and pay this cost?
Yeah, if the system is set up, everyone receives a letter, if it's a county system, for example, that within 1 year they have to connect. Whether, you know, the enforcement takes place or not, this is a law.
Yeah, you are
That's a different
required to
story,
connect
but
if inside the district.
based on what's on the books,
Within a
people
year.
are required to connect
Okay.
if the district
So-
is for it.
so what's next is like, this was our task, was to lay out this information for you. Next is really like up to you to decide what you want to do with it. Everybody who's within the sewer district boundaries votes, and the project doesn't move forward unless people within the district want to move it forward. It doesn't matter what we say or, right, or the county says or anything, that's like your decision. The people within the district, you know, go to referendum.
Yeah, maybe you can describe the creation of the sewer district.
Before we do that, I just wanted
Sure.
to circle back to a question that was partially asked and answered, but the question was whether you had done this before, put these proposals together, and then went further to about how many have you done, and then there are 28 sewer districts in Suffolk County. My question, which deals with the feasibility of all of this, is all seems very orderly and very thoughtful, but what is the track record of being on target with your budgets versus what really happens?
Oh, the cost.
Yes.
I see.
So the elephant in the room, I suppose, is the Southwest Sewer District debacle, which you guys were clearly not part of. But I just, if you tell us it's $28 million and it's $100 million after we go down the road for 3 years, that would be, it'll probably change some people's original
Yeah,
vote.
let me address it. This is just a feasibility
Sure.
study, which if you did, and it's done for your benefit. County doesn't have any vested interest in whether you decide to go ahead with the sewering or not, except for it will improve the environmental quality and the economics and the social benefits coming with that. But it's really, as Marianne said, it's your decision. The legislature charged DPW with doing these studies, and we're doing it for the village in this instance, so you could decide whether you, based on the objective results presented by the consultants, you want to proceed with that or not. So it will be your decision, there will be an opportunity to vote, it will be permissive referendum as part of that. As far as the costs, this is just a feasibility study which gives you, with a certain degree of accuracy, the cost. If you decide to proceed, it will follow by design, which will include, you know, additional cost considerations as well, which may define the results that were developed through the feasibility study. And, you know, if you go to the next level, design and construction, there will always be the cost controls in place, which, if it's a county, district county will administer. So if we're going back to the history,
There's a healthy
it won't be the
contingency in
case.
here.
Go ahead, Ben.
No, we've had both situations. We did some feasibility study in the Kings Park, Smithtown area. And when we got into the final design, things have changed because you start going through the secret process. And even though there's higher contingencies in the feasibility study than an actual design, there are changes that take place. So in that case, the cost did go up somewhat. We have other cases where it went down or stayed about the same. So it depends on what happens you know, during the design process and the environmental review process.
And if your question was the basis of costs, these costs are based on numbers that we're receiving from projects in construction. So these are relative numbers. These aren't numbers just okay, I think this is what it should cost. There is some basis on it from existing work that's currently underway or has been underway in the past.
And you're using the midpoint of construction with escalation as you see it today, rather
Yeah.
than how things might change next year.
Exactly.
But just to add to Ben's point, SECRA, which is environmental review, part of the process, is done before the district is formed, before the permissive referendum takes place. So you will know about the changes as a result of SECRA. I guess the main point here, the stakeholders, if they decide to proceed, they will be informed of any changes in the cost, you know, throughout the design phase, and you know, the SECRA, as I said, will be done earlier, so there'll be no surprises. People will be kept
When you
in the
actually
loop.
get to that voting point, then you have the final design completed and the district form, you know, district almost ready to be formed, but those are really close dollars at that point.
Correct.
When we do the cost estimates, there's a lot we don't know. This is very preliminary. We haven't been in the field doing soil borings or surveys or anything like that. So there's a contingency of 25% built into that. As you go through the design process, that contingency should get smaller and smaller as you start to answer the questions. You know, some sewage treatment plants, like the one in Mamaroneck, I don't know, it's beautiful. But the architectural features of it probably added quite a bit to that cost. You know, it's a historic building and it's beautiful brick, and there's decisions that you make, and once you're helping drive the bus a little bit, then you can be involved in those decisions and decide how much cost control is a driver compared to aesthetics or compared to, you know, energy savings or things like that. Doesn't completely answer your question, but
There isn't an answer yet.
that's true. Yes?
What's an example of the most recent comparable system that you know of that's been put in recently?
You mean size-wise, or you mean,
Yeah, I don't know how large Patchogue is this?
Patchogue is
Patchogue is currently able to handle 800,000 gallons a day.
can,
Patchogue also discharges to surface water, so they don't need the same acreage that you need here. Because this plant is going to discharge to groundwater through recharge pools, leaching pools.
but you're doing 3-4 milligrams per liter there, right?
Right now we are.
Yeah, they've got their nitrogen down quite a bit. And what's
Yeah,
the
We're
most
in the
recent
process
one?
of forming a sewer district now in the Smithtown area, and I believe the cost is $685 for, it's a mixture of single-family homes, townhouses, and condominiums, and apartments, and so it's $685 per equivalent unit, you know, a combination of those. And that dollar amount is going to be in place for a couple of years, and there's a program at the county where they take the Assessment Stabilization Reserve Fund, which is a certain percentage of the sales tax in the whole county, and they stabilize rates. So in that district, that'll stay at $685, probably for 2 or 3 years, and then it will go up by 3% a year in order to take advantage of this other fund. Because if something goes wrong, a large ticket item, the taxes will only go up by 3% regardless of how big that problem to fix is. So so if this was created, you'd fit into the same category where you'd be eligible for that particular fund, and that's, you know, and I know laws can change. It's supposed to be good until 2030. You know, different elected officials might change things, but that's the way it is today.
In terms of the secret process, the county has been pretty proactive about it and trying to expedite the whole process in case people really do want to move forward with it. They've started the whole secret process with the generic environmental impact statement. That was scoped. If we went back to the website, you'll see, you can read the scoping document and the background on that. But we're developing that GEIS right now as a follow-up to these feasibility studies. And then it's possible that you might have to do a supplemental, but it would be much smaller and more focused. The major issues associated with sewering each of these 7 areas are already being addressed.
I have a question regarding the discharge. There was sites designed for a series of discharge with 100% overcapacity on that. This water that being discharged is basically said 0.3 or higher.
3 milligrams.
And this is the water that currently basically feeds actually Lake Agawam, even though it's polluted through the existing systems. What is the ramification of discharge of this so-called clean water back into the lake?
Well, I'm sorry to cut you off. I think I know what you're getting at. The current groundwater limit for nitrogen is 10 milligrams per liter. This is going to be entering the ground at a much lower concentration. This area is at a higher elevation, so these pools aren't going to be in groundwater, so there's going to be some attenuation in the travel time between the pool and the groundwater surface. So if anything, it really is improving on top of what's actually going into the groundwater from the businesses.
Well, I'm talking about direct discharge of the lake, if it's clean water.
Oh, direct surface
you mean
water.
putting a
Oh,
pipe in?
okay.
Just piping it in?
Yes, correct.
That will add to your cost.
I mean, from this location, it's a gravity.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, we
Still
actually
have to-
do have rainwater, storm water
Yeah, going right in.
drainage there.
That's,
And that would basically help in further speeding up expediting the cleaning of the lake in that sense, by
you
feeding
have to
it.
get a different speedy
Yeah, and
permit.
it would have to be looked
Yeah.
into further.
I-
Again, I don't know how.
The state would be involved, right? Right,
Yeah,
DEC?
we've looked at surface discharges for some of our facilities, and New York State DEC has a much lower limitation on what the quality, I mean, a lower number on what you have to get to, and it might be beyond the limit of technology, even though it doesn't seem to make sense on the surface.
It's not just
Yeah.
nitrogen, though.
With
Right.
nitrogen.
Right, they
Other-
look at
other
phosphorus and other,
considerations,
yeah,
yes.
contaminants
You know,
as well.
you've mentioned
That's an
nitrogen, but
interesting thought.
at several meetings, it's been brought up about phosphates. And does this plant address any problems with the phosphates and stopping that from going in? That seems to be one of the main problems with Lake Agawam, is the phosphates in the lake.
Those phosphates, I don't think they're attributed to the wastewater. I think it's more a fertilizer issue in the area.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Is what my understanding is on that as well. So I don't know if this is going to address the phosphate issue, but it will address the nutrient issue as it's associated with nitrogen.
The location it chose is adjacent to a lot of residents. What's the potential for odors from having this plant there?
The building would be enclosed.
And there would be odor control on the building.
That,
So does that-
when you were
It's-
at the Talmadge one in Miller Place, did you smell it outside the building?
You probably don't want me to answer the question.
No, I do.
Go ahead.
You did.
Because
But it's not an MBR plant.
No, it's
the
not.
building has a roof on it, but it's
Yeah.
not enclosed. Meaning there are windows and doors
Oh,
and
that were
fans
open.
blowing.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not the same technology.
Yeah, just,
Yeah.
our answer to that question is that we would never say that an odor won't occur, but we feel that we have the resources to take care of whatever the problem is faster than the private industry does.
So problems do occur with the odor.
They do occur. Some places would never had an odor. Other places, there are situations where maybe a piece of equipment has a problem and it creates an odor, but we have the ability to respond to it fast and take care of it.
To be fair, yesterday, beautiful day, walked around, and yes, the building was not open, not closed. But if you were walking around 50 feet away, there was nothing objectionable.
Right, if you're inside the perimeter, you may see some,
course.
you may
It's
smell
open,
some
open
odors,
system.
but you
But 50
people
feet
that are
away
outside,
it wasn't a problem.
correct, they're not allowed to get into the, into the property of the plant.
Right, but
That's the whole point.
The MBR technology is also, I think, the one that produces the least odor.
Yeah, there's a lot of aeration involved with it, and when aeration's involved, it doesn't allow the wastewater to go septic, which tends to release those odors that are associated with treatment plants.
Yeah, just to answer Ed's question, I've had the ability to be in both the Southampton Hospital Sewer Treatment Plant inside the building and Southampton Rehab. The hospital treatment plant is about maybe 45 years old, maybe even 50 years old, versus the one that's only 10 years old. It's like night and day. You will go around the outside, you don't smell anything. Even when you go inside the building in the new building, it's very faint compared to the Southampton Hospital. So if you see the technology change, I could probably make arrangements to take you into both facilities and show you the differences between the two facilities.
So where you go from here is really up to you. I'd say download the report. You know, our charge was to give you the information that you needed, that you could make a decision on your own if you wanted to move forward as a county facility district, if you wanted to move forward as a village district. If you don't want to do anything, that, you know, that's fine, but the next step is really, goes in your court at this point to move forward.
Yeah, let me talk for a minute about
The creation of.
where we see as far as the next steps. So the report is available online, so you'll be able to review the report. We welcome your comments, say the time frame within next month, within the next 30 days to comment on the draft report. Any comments you wish, we'll try to address them and include them in the final report. The final report is just a document that makes a project, I'll use this word, shovel-ready. You decide whether you want to exercise this option or not. It's going to be up to you to decide. Mark?
Or maybe you can go through the process of creating the sewer district, which is really the next step.
Sure. I mean, I would refer you to this chart. Marian, you want to go through it?
Yeah, and Ben, I'm probably going to call on you for some little support there. So the feasibility study, a lot of what Nick has included in this document would enable it to be submitted as a map and plan. So you could use this to list out all the properties, all 151 properties that would be included, right? So it could function as the map and plan?
Yes, but our experience has been that, excuse me, once we get into the design, it might tweak some of the numbers in the map and plan.
Gotcha.
So we would probably amend it, but the basics are there with the format.
And Mark, you actually alluded to that you might want to have a boundary tweaked for another property. So that's, thank you, because so this isn't hard and fast. You can still change it. But you would do that. You would have hold public hearings and present the information to all the property owners. Have a referendum to see if people wanted to participate or not. You would have to go up to. At that point, it goes to the state controller on the cost basis. Okay.
But you need SECRA and historic preservation as part of that before.
To be complete at that point. We're trying to complete SECRA on the GEIS by the end of this year. That really depends on if some of the other feasibility studies get wrapped up at that point. But the SECRA process may be completed before you're ready to move forward at any point in time. You would have an engineering design report prepared to flesh out all the details here. That's reviewed by DEC. DEC issues the permits. Actually, Department of Public Works would review it first, right? And then it goes to DEC?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you decide to move forward then you retain somebody to prepare your construction documents, your plans and specifications. You go out to bid, and I think it could be built in about 2 years, right? So this is a pretty aggressive schedule. There's a lot that's kind of going on simultaneously here. You could do it sequentially and stretch it out longer. Mark was of the thought that we should try to compress it as much as possible and expedite the process. But that's pretty much the steps. Yeah.
So under this expedited schedule, then, if this were a county project, then it would be approximately 6 years before, if we started today, for example, then you really would be like 6 years before you'd tie in, where the businesses would actually
That's
tie
correct.
in.
That's correct. And it's about the same per village as well.
Well, thank you very much, all.
Thank you for having
I'd like to
us.
thank the Health Department, the Suffolk County Department of Public Works, CDM, and H2M for this presentation tonight. Thank you. I may ask down the line, of course, we're going to be conferring with the trustees, but there may be another possibility for a presentation to the trustees directly. But I'll be in touch with you, Boris, and we'll discuss. Thank you.